Hello, everyone. My photographic practice is driven by a persistent concern for the politics of Black visibility and thinking and considering how identity and history shapes this dynamic. While in graduate school in the fall of 2020, I became aware of the Red Summer of 1919, a specific summer where you had Black Americans returning from World War I proud of their service, with a feeling of belonging, and only returning to a place that was not ready for them. It's important to note that during this Red Summer of 1919, while you all are looking at these maps of incidents, each of these incidents had their own unique catalyst. However, white mobs initiated each time. There aren't many photographs from the Red Summer of 1919. If you Google them, you're going to find the same cities, but one of the most popular photographs was taken during the Chicago riots by June Fujita that shows armed National Guards intimidating a Black man. And I just want you all to look in the center of the photograph and see the young Black boy. He looks directly at us, not as a subject caught up in the chaos, but almost like an observer, as if he's behind the scenes. His deadpan gaze seems to suggest he already understands and knows just how broken this environment is. Unfortunately, finding images in Elaine of then or even now is very difficult. What most of us will find are the newspaper archives that you can find on online archives like from the Library of Congress. And really, these are the few photographs that we have from Elaine. On the left, you'll see the Elaine 12, the 12 Black men who were prosecuted after the massacre and put on death row. And towards the right, you'll see the National Guard arresting Elaine's Black citizens, the ones who lived, and the Governor Charles Brough on the steps of the county courthouse in Helena, Arkansas. It took me a few months to decide whether or not I should be going to Elaine. At the time, I was living 5 hours away in Benton County. There should be some titles there where the arrows are, but just know the top left is where I am, Benton County. I also call it Walmartville. And the bottom right is where Phillips County is, where Elaine is, and it's about a 5-hour drive. And as someone who grew up in Arkansas, in like middle school, junior high, I was confused and angry how I never knew about this history. No one told me about the Arkansas Delta or labor issues in the South. And this is a history that involves hundreds of Black men, women, and children being indiscriminately murdered. And I was confused and angry in the fall of 2020, but I was not surprised. This is a silver gelatin print that I made during my first semester of grad school with digital negatives from those newspaper archives. When researching state and federal archives, there's not many photographs or documents of Elaine and its citizens, as if its legacy and history is meant to be hidden and not talked about. And I recognized this erasure really early. It's hard not to in a place like Elaine. And I wanted to make work that actively countered this removal of Black life and community while also being honest about the realities of this town. And those realities are pretty abysmal. Today, there are people in this town who want to talk about it, feel like they need to talk about it. There's people that don't want to talk about it, rightfully so. And then there's also people who believe the massacre is fake news. The racial divide is as strong as ever in Elaine, right along Main Street. There's a white side of town and a Black side of town. And it creates a culture of silence and negligence in a community of about 500 people that has yet to truly heal. And my first visit was a lonely one in August of 2020. I didn't reach out to anyone before going down there. I didn't know anyone before going down there. And I wasn't going to meet people unless I physically went there. And it was a lonely one until the basketball court appeared. Kids of all ages shoot hoops and ride four-wheelers through loose gravel. It's really the only place in this town where they can be themselves freely. And contrary to popular belief, this town did recover after this massacre. Black families left and then returned. However, a lot of land and property was stolen after this massacre. Throughout the mid-1900s, Elaine had a population of more than double of what it is today. However, today, Elaine does not have enough resources for its residents. And since the schools closed in 2005, this place was never really meant to sustain Black children with education. It was never a priority for the city council. A majority of the children had never heard of what occurred there 100 plus years ago. And I thought that was pretty astonishing, maybe not for the 6 to 8-year-olds I was photographing alongside, but for some of these younger teenagers, they never knew about what happened in Elaine. And it made me realize the lack of education and history that these kids are forced to deal with. And a primary example of that is this mural in Helena, the county seat in Elaine, or in Phillips County. And this is showing a highly distorted representation of Union soldiers leading freed slaves out of the South. And you can't enter or exit Helena without seeing this mural. And it's a perfect example of how an established narrative can morph into fact in this region. Besides the occasional 35-minute drive to Helena, which is where you have to go for groceries, to do your laundry, to have any sort of leisurely fun, I was mostly at the park in Elaine that first year. And while it's important to note that while I'm photographing with medium and large format film, since I've been photographing there in 2020, the kids I photograph alongside have been making work just as long as I have. And so this is actually 3 of the kids that I've known in Elaine for well over 4 years now, photographing in a field next to the basketball court, which is also the land that the old cotton gin was on, and you'll see that in the background towards the left. And they've been, just to reiterate, they've been making images just as long as I have. Digital, color, weird photographs that are not conventionally good photographs, but they don't have this training and they don't have to uphold the conventions of what a photograph is supposed to be, and I really love that. Vive Poindexter Pfizer Park is where the basketball court is, and it's named after Mayor Pfizer, who served from 1985 to 2007. And to this day, he's one of the few people on record stating that the legacy surrounding the massacre has been embellished and that the number of people killed was very inflated. And so what you'll see now is ETO Park. And ETO is something that you'll see throughout the town. You'll see it on different structures, but you'll also see it tattooed on people's arms, on senior citizens and also teenagers. The local rapper in Elaine goes by ETO Dobb. And for a lot of the kids in Elaine, they put ETO in front of their real name. And I was told early on that it stood for Elaine taking over. Before the schools closed in 2005, during basketball games, Elaine High would usually be losing, and then by the fourth quarter, they would usually come back. And then the crowd would start chanting, Elaine taking over. And so that's something you see throughout the town, but you're also not going to know about that unless you speak with people, of course. By photographing alongside the children, returning constantly, giving prints to families, I was slowly building trust. And one conversation led to another, each person pointing me in the direction of someone else who knows more, has more insight, has more stories to share. And that was really what I did a lot the first couple of years in Elaine. But it's important to know I was not the first person to photograph in Elaine. I was told about the Smithsonian Magazine, about National Geographic, The Guardian, going out there, extracting information only to never return. And for me, I knew the act of returning was just as important as the act of making images. Returning and just being present. There's many times I went to Elaine and I didn't bring my camera, or I didn't photograph at all. And I was just there to hang out, to be around, to speak with people. Loitering in a way. But sharing those prints early on opened up new conversations. It deepened connections and allowed people to be seen, valued, and remembered on their own terms, giving them that agency. And that's how many of my relationships with adults was formed. The kids was I just gave them the camera and then they loved me instantly. And I would have to tell them, don't run around, don't break it. But I didn't really inform them as to how they should use the camera. I would just set it to an auto setting and then just let them run wild. And it was these small, everyday exchanges that built up over time. And I listened more than I spoke those first couple of years, and it took time, consistency, and a willingness to show up without any expectations. And I think something that I've always considered when making work in Elaine is these stories and legacies that have just been hidden, that people don't want to talk about, people have been afraid to talk about. Right here, this is a father I'd wanted to photograph for a few years, and I would always see him at the apartments next to the basketball courts. And no matter how long we would get into a conversation, he never wanted to be photographed. And you just have to learn to accept that and be okay with that. One thing I learned in Elaine is I'm not forcing anything. If you don't want to be photographed, that's fine. That's okay. However, when I show you prints and you see your daughter or you see your cousin, that's definitely opening you up. And there was one specific day that changed when he asked me to walk with him from the apartment buildings near the basketball court to the cemetery that's very close by. You can see the basketball court kind of in this photo in the background from the cemetery. And him and his friend wanted to have a moment of silence for his son who passed away at a really young age, at the age of 16, a couple years before I made this picture. And so I stayed in the background, and I was just kind of there and present. But while they, poured out libations and like had this private moment, that was really emotional for me. And these stories, these experiences influence how this work is made. And if those experiences didn't happen, I'm not sure this work would end up looking like this, or if I would even be here talking to all of you. I found out about the hanging tree in Elaine during that first year as well. James White told me about it. It was the hanging tree for the white residents in Phillips County, and it rests along the same road, less than 5 minutes away from the massacre. And I always knew it would die eventually. I didn't think I would be around to witness this decay, let alone photograph the process. And in 2019, a year before my first visit, 2 trees were planted to commemorate what happened there. One was chopped down, and the other mysteriously rotted from the inside out. So I like to look at this triptych as a symbolic moment, a reckoning and maybe a reconstruction. But I also know for a fact that history has a way of pushing back. And so when you go around Elaine, at least for me, I'm looking for all of these markers that speak to what happened there. This is a police car that was positioned inside of a defunct car wash in Elaine. To serve and protect feels like a promise kind of suspended in time. It's a reminder of authority without action, of systems that watch but rarely intervene in ways that matter for the people who live there. It's not just about what's broken, right? But what was never truly built to serve them in the first place. And after that first year, I was fortunate enough to be able to host a photo camp. I took this simple exchange of the cameras I was stealing from my graduate program and bringing down to Elaine. And I knew I wanted to do something more meaningful, something more long-term. And we did this photo camp during the summers of 2021 and 2022 in the Elaine Legacy Center, which is the old elementary school that's still there. And like I said earlier, the goal was never technical perfection, but to understand their relationship to this place. And that relationship was full of boredom, of laughter and humor, pride and curiosity as well. And being able to have access to a printer, scanners, studio lights, they were able to make their own work on their own terms, edit their work, make prints. And this constant engagement week after week helped further establish my relationship with a lot of the parents who provided the lunches during these workshops, but then also served as referees during our Uno matches at the end of the day. And these are images that these kids made inside of the Elaine Legacy Center. And there's a lot of images, but these are the ones that I like to show the most. They're very colorful, they're very playful, but also some of them are very serious as well. And there was a lot about Phillips County I didn't know in year 1 that I found out in year 2 or in year 3. And I like to think if I had known that in year 1, I would have looked at this place a lot differently. I didn't know Phillips County had the highest percentage of Black Arkansans, but also maintains the lowest life expectancy in the state and the highest poverty rate in the state. In fact, in 2023, 46% of children in Phillips County were living in poverty, meaning nearly half of all children, Black children, are growing up in conditions that make survival an almost daily struggle for a lot of people. And it's important for me, after saying that, to really paint the picture that these aren't just numbers or statistics, but it's real lives that have been shaped by limited access to resources, failing infrastructure. If you look around the streets and the houses in Elaine, you'll understand what I mean. But also a school system that has been abandoned rather than invested in. And so when I started this work, kids were going to school 2 days a week, about 45 minutes away, due to COVID. But today, kids are still going to that school 45 minutes away, and it's not close whatsoever. For them, on the bus, it takes like an hour. The cemetery is located right next to the basketball court, like I mentioned earlier, and it's not uncommon to see a funeral on any given Saturday. I've stumbled around like 4 of them just being there on a random weekend. And 5 people have passed away since this work began, and one of them you all just saw a couple photographs back. For the longest time, I envisioned this work contributing to an archive similar to the collection of ephemera and images that Ms. Viora holds onto in her living room. just so you all know, this entire room is like red, and it's crazy to see. But this archive was meant to be housed inside of a civil rights museum that the town was set to open in 2023. And I was really stoked about it. I was talking about this work that if you want to see it in its entirety, which is well over 150 photographs, you would have to go to Elaine. But due to mismanagement and poor construction, it's been canceled, and perhaps that's for the best. Initially, I was very upset. That's something I had been speaking about for years, wasn't coming to fruition, but that quickly faded. If you wanted to move to Elaine, there's nowhere for you to live. The water remains undrinkable, and if you desire fresh food or wash clothes, you must make an hour round trip to Helena. And so this place is it's lacking in what it offers to its residents. So what would it mean for a town to create a civil rights museum when it lacks the resources to meet its residents' basic needs? And my work continues to ask these questions about what could an archive look like if it were built with the people in Elaine? Not my photographs that you're seeing, but the photographs the kids have been making, the photographs that families have held on to. And together we are beginning to imagine these answers, slowly, intentionally, through photographs, oral histories, conversations, and collective memory. And I'm not interested in documenting the past by any means, but engaging with the ways in which the past continues to shape the present, how its echoes live within the land, within the people, and within the silences we're still trying to break. Thank you all.